At 13 years old, I learned something most children never have to learn. You can be unwanted in your own home. Our house in Portland wasn't poor, but it wasn't warm either. It was a narrow, two-story place with peeling white paint and a maple tree in the yard that dropped leaves every fall like clockwork. From the outside, we looked normal. Inside, everything revolved around my older sister, Tiffany. Tiffany was sunshine. Tiffany was talent. Tiffany was sensitive. I was difficult, or independent, or my mother's favorite word, selfish. I learned early that praise had a direction in our house, and it wasn't toward me. If Tiffany brought home a B+, my parents took her out for ice cream. If I brought home straight A's, my father would nod once and say, "That's expected." I don't think they started out hating me. I think I just didn't fit the shape of the child they wanted. Tiffany loved dance recitals, glittery costumes, and loud applause. My mother thrived on that. She could post pictures, invite neighbors, talk about rehearsals. It made her feel important. I loved numbers. I loved solving problems that didn't talk back. Math made sense. Effort produced results. There were rules. There was fairness. At night, while Tiffany practiced routines in the living room, I'd sit at the kitchen table with old algebra workbooks borrowed from the library. My father once looked over my shoulder and said, "Why are you doing that? You're ahead already." Because I liked it. Because it felt safe. Because equations didn't compare me to someone else. Everything changed the day the letter arrived. It was a thick envelope addressed to me. Not the Morrison family, not parents of Diana, just me. Oregon STEM Academy. I remember my hands shaking as I opened it. I had taken the entrance exam months earlier after my math teacher quietly encouraged me. She paid the application fee herself. I hadn't told my parents until after I'd submitted it. "Congratulations," the letter began. "Full academic scholarship, boarding option available, advanced placement track." I read it 3 times before I understood what it meant. Chosen. For the first time in my life, someone had looked at me, not Tiffany, and said, "You matter." I ran into the living room where Tiffany and my mom were scrolling through dance competition photos. "I got in," I said, breathless. "Full scholarship." My mother didn't look up immediately. "Got into what?" "The STEM Academy, the one in Salem. They're covering tuition." Silence. My father took the letter from my hand and skimmed it. His jaw tightened slightly. "That's far," he said. "It's only 2 hours," I replied quickly. "They have dorms. It's one of the best schools in the state." Tiffany finally looked at me. "So you'd leave?" It wasn't accusation, it was curiosity. "Yes," I said. I didn't realize until later that in that moment, something shifted in the room. I had stepped outside the script they had written for me. 3 days later, my mother called me into the kitchen. Tiffany had been accepted to an exclusive summer arts intensive in California. It cost nearly $10,000. "We can't afford both," my mother said calmly, folding a dish towel. "You understand that." "It's a scholarship. You don't have to pay anything." "There are travel costs, supplies, dorm fees. You'd need clothes, a laptop." "I can apply for grants." My father leaned against the counter. "Tiffany's opportunity won't come again." I stared at him. "Neither will mine." My mother's voice hardened. "We've decided you're going to decline the offer." The words didn't make sense at first. Decline? "You're young. You can apply somewhere else later. Your sister is on the edge of something big." My hands began to shake, but my voice didn't. "No." The kitchen went very still. My father straightened. "What did you say?" I said no. It's my scholarship. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't tense. It was cold. Seattle felt like another planet. The air was colder, cleaner. The streets were wider. Uncle Harold's house overlooked Lake Washington, all glass windows and quiet hallways that echoed when you walked through them. I remember standing in the entryway that first night with my shoes still on, afraid to step too far inside, as if I might be told it was a mistake. "You live here now," Harold said. "Not for now, not until things calm down. Now." That word scared me more than being left on the porch. The first few weeks were disorienting. No one compared me to Tiffany. No one sighed when I spoke. At dinner, Harold asked me questions and waited for answers. "What do you like about math?" he asked one night, cutting his steak with precise movements. I shrugged. "It makes sense." He nodded. "Then let's build a life that makes sense." He moved quickly but quietly. Meetings with administrators at the Oregon STEM Academy, arrangements for transportation, legal paperwork finalized. He hired a tutor, not because I was behind, but because he wanted me stretched. For the first time in my life, an adult was investing in me without asking what it would cost them socially. Still, I didn't trust it. I kept my room immaculate. I folded laundry before he could see it in the basket. I studied until 2 in the morning because excellence felt like insurance. If I became valuable enough, I wouldn't be returned. Harold noticed. "You don't have to earn your place here," he said one evening, after finding me rewashing already clean dishes. "You already have it." I didn't know how to respond to that. Love without conditions felt like a trick question. I waited for the fine print. It never came. At the academy, I thrived. Advanced calculus at 14, linear algebra at 15, programming languages that felt like new dialects of logic. The robotics lab became my second home. We built autonomous vehicles, predictive models, simulation engines. For the first time, being obsessed with numbers wasn't strange. It was expected. I wasn't the odd one out anymore. I was one of many. The absence of comparison did something radical inside me. I stopped bracing. I started raising my hand. I volunteered for competitions. I won a statewide coding challenge at 16 and a financial modeling contest at 17. Harold attended everything he could. He never made speeches. He never posted photos. He simply showed up, hands in coat pockets, eyes steady. When I graduated as valedictorian, I searched the crowd for him, not my parents. They didn't attend. They didn't send a card. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was beyond needing that kind of acknowledgement. But when the ceremony ended and families gathered for photos, there was still a small, stubborn ache in my chest. Harold stood beside me for every picture. "You built this," he said quietly. No one had ever framed my success that way before. I chose the University of Washington for my finance degree. Numbers had always been safe, but finance felt powerful. Money wasn't abstract. It moved institutions. It saved companies during recessions. It destroyed them when mismanaged. I wanted to understand that machinery. Control had become important to me. I double majored in accounting and economics, took 18 credits per quarter, interned at investment firms downtown, often arriving before sunrise and leaving after dark. I passed the CPA exam on my first attempt at 22. I didn't celebrate much. I never quite learned how. During my junior year, I started analyzing Harold's real estate portfolio out of curiosity. Meyers' property holdings was stable but conservative. Good assets, low leverage, predictable returns. But there were inefficiencies, capital sitting idle, underutilized properties, outdated financing structures. One evening, I asked if I could see the company's detailed financial statements. Harold studied me for a long moment. "Why?" "I think you're leaving money on the table." That earned a slight smile. He handed me full access. I spent 6 weeks dissecting everything: debt ratios, occupancy trends, cash flow variability, tax structures. I built models projecting alternative financing strategies and asset repositioning plans. When I presented a 30-page restructuring proposal to him at the dining table, I expected resistance. He read it twice, slowly. "You're wasted anywhere else," he said finally. At 24, I joined Meyers Property Holdings as a financial analyst. Some executives assumed I was there because of family ties. They were polite, but distant. I worked twice as hard. I restructured 3 underperforming properties in my first year, negotiated improved lending terms with 2 banks, and implemented a reporting system that reduced quarterly review time by 30%. By 26, I was director of finance. By 28, I was chief financial officer. The promotion made regional business headlines: youngest CFO in company history, strategic mind behind portfolio growth. Photographs of me in tailored suits appeared in business journals. Harold didn't announce it at a family dinner. He called me into his office. "You've earned this," he said simply. Not, "I'm giving this to you," not, "this is yours because of me." Earned. That word meant everything. Yet ambition had hardened parts of me. I was efficient, controlled, measured. I built systems so tight nothing unpredictable could break through. But sometimes, late at night in my downtown apartment, after reviewing investment projections and risk assessments, I would think about the porch in Portland, about the garbage bags, about how easily I had them removed. Success had rebuilt my life, but it hadn't erased the fracture. It had simply layered achievement over it, like polished glass over a crack in concrete. From the outside, everything looked seamless. Inside, I was still that 13-year-old who had learned that security could disappear in a single evening. The difference now was this: I would never again allow someone else to decide my worth. The call came on a Tuesday morning between a lender negotiation and a quarterly performance review. I almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, Oregon area code. "Hello?" Silence for a moment, then a voice I hadn't heard in 15 years. "Diana?" My spine went rigid. "Yes?" It's Mom." The word felt foreign, like hearing it in another language. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't angry. I wasn't emotional. I was calculating. Why now? Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered, less polished. "I know this is unexpected." "That's one word for it." A shaky breath on the other end. "We need help." There it was. Not, "I miss you," not, "I'm sorry." Help. I swiveled my chair slowly, staring out at the Seattle skyline from my office window. "What kind of help?" She said, "It's your father. He had a stroke last year. Medical bills are... We've fallen behind. The house is in foreclosure." The house. The porch. The garbage bags. I felt something move inside me. Not rage, not satisfaction, just distance. "And Tiffany?" I asked. Things didn't work out the way we hoped." Of course they hadn't. There was a pause long enough to hold history. "We heard you're doing well," my mother continued carefully. "Very well." Heard. Not watched. Not followed. "I'm a CFO," I said plainly. "Yes." "We're not asking for charity," she rushed to add. "Just a loan. Something to help us get back on our feet." A loan. The irony was almost elegant. 15 years ago, they told me they couldn't afford me. Now they were asking if I could afford them. "I'll have my office contact you for financial documents. If I'm going to consider anything, I'll need full transparency." There was visible relief in her exhale. Of course. Of course. Thank you. I didn't say you're welcome. After I hung up, I sat still for a long time. I expected to feel vindicated. Instead, I felt tired. That evening, I drove to Harold's house. He listened without interrupting as I explained the call. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Not, "What should you do?" Not, "What's right?" What do you want? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to wire the money just to prove I can. Another part wants to do nothing. He nodded. Both reactions make sense? They didn't even apologize. Are you surprised? No. I stared at the lake through his living room windows. If I help them, it won't be emotional. It will be structured. Harold smiled slightly. Of course it will. I requested everything. Bank statements, medical bills, mortgage documents, outstanding debts. When the files arrived, I reviewed them the way I would any distressed asset. Poor financial planning, high-interest credit cards, refinancing mistakes, over-leveraged decisions. It was a familiar pattern. 3 days later, I drove to Portland for the first time since I was 13. The house looked smaller. The paint was chipped. The maple tree was gone. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She had aged more than I expected. Lines around her mouth, shoulders slightly curved inward. For a moment, we just looked at each other. "You look," she began. "Successful?" I offered. She flinched. Inside, the house smelled the same. Lemon cleaner and something faintly stale. My father was in a recliner by the window, thinner, slower. His right hand trembled slightly. He looked at me as if trying to reconcile two versions of the same person. "You've done well," he said. I have. No hug, no tears. We sat at the dining table, the same one where they signed papers giving me away. I laid out a folder. "This is not a gift," I said evenly. "It's a secured loan. I will pay off the mortgage directly to stop the foreclosure. In exchange, the property transfers into a trust under my control." My mother blinked. "A trust?" "You will be allowed to live here for the remainder of your lives. You will not own it." Silence. My father's jaw tightened. "You don't trust us." I met his eyes steadily. "No, I don't." The honesty settled heavily between us. "You're treating this like business," my mother whispered. "It is." She looked down at her hands. "We were hard on you." Hard. That was the word she chose. "You relinquished your parental rights," I said quietly. "That's not hard. That's permanent." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't move to comfort her. My father cleared his throat. "We thought you'd fail." The confession hung in the air like smoke. "And when I didn't?" He didn't answer. I slid the pen across the table. "These are the terms." They signed, the same way they had years ago, quietly, efficiently. When it was done, my mother looked at me with something like regret. "Do you ever think about coming back?" I stood. "No." At the door, I paused. "I didn't fail," I said, not angrily, just factually. "You miscalculated." Then I walked out of the house without looking back. This time, I wasn't the one being sent away. I was the one who chose to leave. The headlines came 3 months later. Not about the loan, not about Portland. About me. Meyers Property Holdings announces strategic expansion. CFO Diana Meyers leads $400 million acquisition initiative. The deal had been mine from conception to execution, a multi-state portfolio acquisition that doubled our commercial footprint across the Pacific Northwest. I had structured the financing, negotiated lender terms, and identified undervalued properties that larger firms had overlooked. It was the kind of move that shifts a company's trajectory. At the press conference in Seattle, flashes went off as I stepped to the podium. I wore navy. Structured, controlled, deliberate. Reporters asked about growth strategy, market timing, risk exposure. I answered every question without notes. Afterward, as I shook hands with investors, a familiar voice cut through the room. I always knew she'd do something big. I turned slowly. Tiffany. She looked almost the same, carefully styled, expressive, still beautiful in the way that draws attention without trying. But there was something else now. Fatigue, maybe, or humility? "I didn't expect to see you here," I said. "I didn't expect you to be on stage," she replied, attempting a smile. We stepped aside, away from cameras. "I've been following your work," she said. "You're kind of a big deal." "That's what the articles say." She studied me for a long moment. "You told me about the house." I assumed she would. "She said you were generous." "It wasn't generosity." Tiffany hesitated. "She cries about you sometimes." I absorbed that without visible reaction. "Does she?" "She says she handled things badly." "Handled," I repeated. Tiffany's shoulders sagged slightly. "Okay, she ruined it. Is that better?" I didn't answer. For years, Tiffany had been the golden child, the orbit everything revolved around. But standing here, she didn't look golden. She looked uncertain. "What happened with California?" I asked. She gave a small laugh. "Turns out talent isn't enough. There are thousands of girls who can dance. I got injured at 20. That was pretty much it." "And after?" "Teaching, small studios, some choreography gigs. Nothing stable." It wasn't bitterness in her voice, it was realism. "I didn't know how to call you," she said quietly, "after you left." "You could have." "I was 13, too." That stopped me. I had always framed Tiffany as complicit, the favorite, the beneficiary, but she was also a child inside a system neither of us designed. "I didn't ask them to choose me," she continued. "I just didn't stop them." The honesty landed cleanly. Across the room, investors were still mingling, cameras still flashing, my name still circulating in conversations about growth and leverage and expansion. But for a moment, I was back in that living room at 13, watching her rehearse dance routines while I solved equations at the kitchen table. "You know they thought I'd fail." Tiffany nodded slowly. "I know." "Did you?" She met my eyes. "No, I thought you'd leave." That surprised me. "I always knew you'd leave," she added. "You were never going to stay small." The words settled somewhere deep. We stood in silence for a few seconds, the weight of shared history between us. "I'm not here to ask for money, before you wonder." I wasn't wondering. "Good," she exhaled. I wanted to see you in your world, to understand it." "And?" She glanced around at the polished floors, the city skyline beyond the glass, the controlled energy of high-stakes business. "It suits you," she said. For years, I had built armor out of competence, structured deals instead of relationships, controlled variables instead of emotions. But looking at Tiffany now, I realized something uncomfortable. Success had proven them wrong. It hadn't made me whole. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened an old storage box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were notebooks from the academy, competition medals, a folded copy of my valedictorian speech, and at the bottom, the scholarship letter. Congratulations. Chosen. I used to think that was the moment my life began, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it began on the porch, when the door closed, when I realized survival didn't require permission. My phone buzzed. A message from Tiffany. "I'm glad you didn't fail." I stared at it for a long time before responding. I'm glad you came. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, but it wasn't war either. The next morning, I walked into the Meyers executive board meeting with the same steady confidence as always. We discussed expansion strategy, long-term asset diversification, potential IPO positioning. As I outlined 5-year projections, I felt something subtle but significant. Not the drive to prove, not the need to outperform, just clarity. I had spent 15 years building a life no one could take from me. Now that it was built, I didn't have to keep defending it. When the meeting ended, one of the board members, a seasoned investor who rarely complimented anyone, paused beside me. "You're not just good, you're formidable." I thanked him, but for the first time, formidable didn't feel like armor. It felt like choice. Later that evening, I stood by my apartment window overlooking Seattle. The city lights reflected in the glass, sharp and endless. At 13, I had been discarded. At 28, I had rebuilt. At 30, I understood something I didn't before. Being chosen by others is temporary. Choosing yourself is permanent. Years passed without drama. The trust functioned exactly as structured. The Portland house remained legally mine, though my parents lived in it. Mortgage cleared, property taxes automated. No emotional entanglement, just compliance reports and annual reviews handled by my legal team. Distance, managed professionally. My father's health declined steadily. Minor stroke complications became mobility issues. Mobility issues became hospital stays. My mother called occasionally, not to ask for money, but to provide updates, as if submitting quarterly reports. "Your father fell. The doctor adjusted his medication. He asks about you." I listened. I didn't rush down every time. I visited twice a year. Polite, controlled, measured. The first time my father apologized, it was almost accidental. We were sitting in the living room, late afternoon light slanting across the carpet. His speech was slower now, words deliberate. "I misjudged you," he said. It wasn't poetic, it wasn't emotional, but it was real. "You did," I replied. He nodded once, accepting the correction like a man acknowledging a failed investment. He continued. "I thought pressure would break you. Didn't realize it would sharpen you. I considered that. You didn't apply pressure, you removed support." He closed his eyes briefly. There was no defense this time. My mother apologized differently, tearfully, repetitively, as if volume could compensate for delay. "I was scared," she admitted one evening at the kitchen table. "Tiffany needed so much. You didn't. You seemed fine." I almost smiled. I wasn't fine. I was quiet. That distinction seemed to land harder than anger would have. When my father passed, the call came at 3:12 a.m. I drove to Portland before sunrise. The house was silent in a way that felt permanent. My mother sat at the dining table, the same table where signatures had altered all our lives. "He talked about you at the end," she said softly. "Said you were the strongest thing he ever built." I absorbed that carefully. He didn't build me, he tried to unbuild me. But I attended the funeral, I stood beside my mother, I accepted condolences from neighbors who remembered me as the other daughter. Afterward, I made a decision. I transferred the house from the trust into my mother's name outright. No conditions, no structure, no leverage. When I handed her the paperwork, she stared at it in disbelief. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I don't need collateral anymore." That was the truth. Success had proven my worth to the world. Boundaries had proven it to myself. Forgiveness, measured, intentional forgiveness, was simply the final act of independence. Months later, Tiffany opened a small performing arts studio in Portland. I invested quietly as a minority partner. Not charity, not rescue, just belief. We speak regularly now, not as rivals, not as symbols of parental imbalance, just as sisters navigating adulthood without inherited scripts. I don't romanticize what happened when I was 13. Being given away leaves a scar that doesn't disappear, but scars are proof of healing, not weakness. My parents chose fear. I chose expansion. And in the end, that choice made all the difference.